The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Hello and welcome back to the show. In this short Empathy Expansion Kit episode, we are covering the topic of empathy-based metrics. I'm Stephen Sakach here with Tullio Siragusa. Hey, Tullio.
Hey, this one's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think so too. Empathy, so when done right, it correlates with business success, right? It's we've done a lot of podcasts just talking about all kinds of different metrics and the ROI of these just different empathy-based tactics. So whether it's, your customer acquisition costs or your profit margins or retention or any sort of, there's so many empathy-based stats along with this that ultimately, in one way or another, it just majorly impacts your bottom line. And we've seen even like the studies with the S&P 500 companies compared to these conscious capitalist companies where over a 15-year time span, the conscious capitalist companies outperformed them by something like 1,600% to 117% during that time. So it's definitely, there's all kinds of metrics that get into the bottom line, and we love all the bottom line metrics. But what about, Tullio, those empathy or love-based metrics that kind of tally some of these other areas of the business?
Well, everybody's familiar with net promoter scores for client metrics, but there's one metric that can be put into place that's not often practiced by a lot of businesses. And we'll talk about the correlation between this one and actual net promoter scores with clients later. But I'm talking about the employee satisfaction and engagement score. Most companies will hear this and like, what? So think of the same way you do a net promoter score for customers, do that for employee satisfaction. It's how you gauge how the employees feel about leadership and the empathy in the organization and the culture of the company. And this is an opportunity to really give employees a chance to be heard, to feel valued, and to be supported. But it's also very telling about the quality of your leadership, because how do you know whether a leader is actually doing their job really well? Well, how people feel about them will say a lot.
Yeah, so that's like one of these employee-based metrics. We're going to talk a little about the employee-based ones, and then we're going to go into the customer-based one. So another employee-based metric that I think about a lot is the turnover and retention rates. If you've got high turnover rates, something's going on in your company that really needs to be figured out. You're grinding your employees. They aren't satisfied. There's maybe the job's a bit soulless. We got to find your soul for you. But there's, look at those retention rates. And this will tell you a story and compare them to maybe, you could compare them to your peers if you want to, but just, why aren't you at 95% or something? Or, why aren't you at a super high rate? Try and figure out that, put things in place, and then watch those retention rates over time and see how some of the different policies, different things you're doing, if it's improved those retention rates.
The other one is also peer recognition and internal communication. So having programs to do that. So introducing the use of peer recognition programs like kudos boards or other internal communications tools to track positive interaction and acknowledgement between employees. This reflects a culture of empathy as well. And there's correlation between all these things and customer satisfaction and revenue. We'll go into that a little bit, but there's a lot of connection to these internal efforts that impact your bottom line. For those who think, we can't measure that in the ROI. Yes, you can.
Yeah, I think we use for peer-to-peer giving Assembly, but you can go in there and you can kind of see sort of just all the details of who's giving how much to who. So there are metrics with that peer-to-peer giving that, we call these kind of bliss metrics. So there's a bunch of them in there that are just related to, it's not specific bottom line KPI. We just know it's going to help all these other bottom line metrics, right? So there's tools out there for that. let's switch gears a little bit now to the more customer-focused empathy metrics. And obviously, you've got employee retention, you've also got customer retention and loyalty. So this is a big one. Discuss how we're going to discuss how you can improve those by changing things like how you're dealing with your employees. We talked about, or your customers. We talked about the customer satisfaction empathy a few episodes ago. These are kind of things that can help with that retention and that loyalty. If they come to you with a problem, how are you dealing with that problem? Are you making that emotional connection? And then you can kind of look over time. Okay, is this customer? We're doing repeat purchases. We're renewing our subscriptions. Are we in a customer loyalty program? There's a lot of different things that show this level of engagement with your customers. And so really looking at those kind of metrics, look at, not just churn rates, and not just repeat business, but that customer lifetime value. That's really one of the big ones we always try to get to in marketing, because it tells a more full story. So it's like, am I paying, $100 for this customer? Well, what does that really mean? Yeah, they just made a $200 purchase, but over the lifetime of this customer, what does it mean? 2,000, 15,000? There's often a lot there along the way that you just need to consider when you're doing your marketing and things like that. So customer lifetime value will just tell you a lot about your customers.
So one thing that I think is important to mention here is most companies will track these as KPIs, key performance indicators. But if you peel back the surface, all these metrics actually reveal how empathetic you are. Because you care to know what your customers think of you. You care to know what your employees think of you. You care to know whether they're repeating business, whether they're loyalty building. The relationship, it's a way to score the relationship, which actually is a judgment on how empathetic you are in your business. The higher the score, the more it feels, the more empathetic you are, because you actually are connecting with all these folks. And there's a correlation between the employee satisfaction score and all the other outcomes, and that has a bottom line impact as well. So, for example, Stephen, let's talk about customer satisfaction and net promoter score. Can you explain how these scores reflect a customer's perception on an empathetic level of the business?
I mean, like if you didn't track them, how are you going to know how you're doing with some of them? I think, like the high scores, that's going to indicate just how customers feel valued, right? So if you're working on stuff like we've talked about for making emotional connections with customers, if I've got this baseline data, that I'm working with, and now we implemented some new training for our staff, or we've implemented a new program or something, you'll want to be able to see kind of the ROI on how well that did. And it's hard if you don't just have like some baseline score of some sort to look at, along with the training that you implemented or whatever you've implemented.
I just want to add that this works a lot more effectively if you also have an employee satisfaction score initiative. You will see a direct correlation on the improvement of a client satisfaction score to an improvement to the employee satisfaction score. You will also see a correlation on a drop on the customer satisfaction score when you see a drop on the employee satisfaction score. One impacts the others. And if you don't believe me, just try it. Try it for 6 months and you'll come back and say, wow, there is an absolute direct correlation between these two scores. And the employee satisfaction score is probably the most critical. That's foundational to everything else that happens in the business.
Yeah. So if you're tracking, Tullio, like that employee satisfaction score, and then you implement something that is more of a, like we talked about, some sort of emotional connection with customer kind of training. If you're just looking at the employee satisfaction score, you're going to see that improve, is what you're saying, right? not just the customer satisfaction, but the employee satisfaction score, this other metric completely that is completely, sort of different than the bottom line metric you're more focused for.
Because when customers give you feedback, right, and you need to go make some changes, if you force it on the organization, in other words, you don't do it empathetically, then the employees will not adopt it easily, and it ultimately will impact their ability to serve the client's needs. But if you empathetically do it in a way that takes into consideration how the employees will react, how they will feel in adopting this, creating a model where they can empathetically connect to this requirement, then you're going to see people corral around the issue, create better outcomes, which ultimately will improve the score and the needs of the client. That's why there's a direct correlation between the two. You can't just force people to make the change to support what the clients need. You have to be empathetic through the whole process.
Yep. So there's other things you can do, obviously, with like social media, customer feedback, looking at your mentions, your online reviews, all that. We share a lot of our positive feedback with our group as a whole, so that everyone's kind of feeling the positive vibes when someone else gets some praise in the company. We kind of all get praise in some ways. So we're looking for opportunities to share that and looking opportunities to improve. Tullio, I want to talk real briefly. There is a thing with like purpose-driven companies where if they know their purpose, they're often able to provide some sort of KPI around that. So a lot of times it could be like some environmental based metrics, companies, when they have that triple bottom line approach, people, planet, profit, they've got planet related metrics, and that could be their use of, sustainably sourced materials or their energy used, those kind of things. And so do you think when you've got a purpose like that, it just makes finding these other sort of empathy-based, love-based metrics much easier?
Well, absolutely. Look, it's human desire to belong to something greater than ourselves, to have meaning behind what we're doing, to be able to make an impact, and to be becoming, to grow, right? So if you have a purpose-driven metrics like giving back, then it gives meaning to what you're doing beyond what you're doing. And it's something that has a ripple down effect, not just on the employees, but your customers too, because they're contributing to this purpose as well. So you get to make an impact, you get to have meaning behind what you're doing. It's something greater than yourself. And in the process of doing this, you get to step outside of your comfort zone in some cases, whether the company's pushing for volunteering or for making donations. These are all opportunities that increase the likelihood of having good metrics around customer satisfaction as well as employee satisfaction. So these things do play a big role in that.
And it's really important, I think, not just to do these things, but really to tie them into your company's purpose. So if it's like, we build shoes and sell shoes, and part of our higher purpose is to donate shoes to people, right? It all ties in. Or with like Warby Parker, you've got glasses donated worldwide. That can be a metric, and that's something that they track, right? So you can track your glasses donated, you can track your shoes donated. And so when you have that higher purpose tied into your company, or when you fully understand your higher purpose, you can figure out, different metrics and ways to bring it all together. That's it for today's show. Catch us again tomorrow as we are live with our guest. So join in, ask questions, and we will see you on the next Bliss Business Podcast.